The Christmas lights burned too bright. Emma stood in her aunt's mansion surrounded by family who measured her worth in dollars and diplomas. 28 years old, still serving coffee for minimum wage, still alone. The questions came sharp and relentless. When her cousin flashed a diamond ring and asked if Emma had given up on life, something inside her snapped. She ran outside, found a stranger by the gate, and handed him her last $50. 1 hour. Pretend to be her boyfriend. Just get through tonight. She had no idea the man in the worn sweater was hiding a fortune that could buy her aunt's house 1,000 times over. Emma had arrived 2 hours early to help set up, even though no one asked her to. She moved through her aunt's kitchen like a ghost, arranging platters of food she couldn't afford to buy herself, straightening napkins that cost more than her weekly groceries. Her Aunt Margaret watched from the doorway with arms crossed, offering no thanks, only the occasional correction. The chandelier overhead cast everything in gold, but the light felt cold. She wore the same black dress she'd worn to last year's party and the year before that. It was clean-pressed, appropriate. It was also the only formal thing she owned. Margaret had looked at it when Emma arrived and said nothing, which somehow felt worse than criticism. Emma had learned to read those silences. They carried judgments sharper than words. The guests began arriving around 7. Cousins and uncles and second cousins, twice removed, all of them polished and loud with success. There was Richard, a cardiologist, who just bought his second vacation home. There was Stephanie, a corporate lawyer, who wore heels that cost more than Emma's monthly rent. There was Brian, who worked in finance and never let anyone forget it. They greeted each other with hugs that looked warm but felt like performances. Emma stood near the wall and watched. Margaret introduced her to a group by the fireplace. Her voice had that particular tone, the one that was friendly on the surface, but transmitted something else underneath. "This is my niece, Emma. She lives with me, works at a coffee shop downtown." The words weren't cruel, but they landed like small cuts. The group nodded politely and turned back to their own conversations within seconds. Emma became invisible again. Dinner was served at 8. The table stretched the length of the dining room, crowded with crystal and china that caught the light. Emma sat near the end, wedged between a cousin she barely knew and an empty chair that stayed empty. The conversation flowed around her, a river she couldn't enter. They talked about promotions and investments, about renovations and private schools. She cut her food into smaller and smaller pieces and said nothing. Then Stephanie leaned forward, wine glass in hand, and smiled at Emma. "So any updates this year, new job?" The question seemed innocent, but the table went quiet. Emma felt everyone's attention shift toward her like a spotlight she didn't want. She swallowed and tried to sound casual, still at the coffee shop. Saving up. Stephanie's smile didn't move. Saving up for what Emma didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound pathetic, so she said nothing. Richard jumped in, trying to be helpful in a way that made things worse. "You went to college, right? What was your degree in again?" "Communications," Emma said quietly. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're trying to think of something encouraging to say and can't. "Well, that's a tough field. Very competitive." She wanted to tell him she knew that she'd sent out hundreds of applications, that no one wanted to hire someone with 3 years of experience making lattes. Instead, she just nodded. Brian, the finance cousin, set down his fork. "I just don't understand why people major in things like that." "No offense, Emma, but you had to know there weren't any jobs." His tone was casual, like he was discussing the weather. Emma's face went hot. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Margaret at the head of the table sipped her wine and said nothing. No one did. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then the younger cousin Jessica arrived late in a swirl of perfume and excitement. She was 24, newly engaged, glowing with the kind of happiness that seemed to take up all the air in the room. She held out her hand so everyone could admire the ring, a diamond so big it looked almost vulgar. Everyone cooed and congratulated her. Jessica beamed and launched into the story of the proposal, every detail polished and perfect. When she finished, she turned to Emma with a smile that was just a little too bright. "What about you, Emma? Anyone special in your life?" The question hung in the air. Emma shook her head. Jessica tilted her head in a gesture that might have been sympathy. "Really? I mean, you're, 28 now?" Emma nodded. Jessica's smile faltered for just a second, then returned even brighter. "Well, don't give up. I'm sure the right person is out there. You just have to put yourself out there, maybe lower your standards a little." Someone laughed. Emma wasn't sure who. It didn't matter. The words hit like a slap. She felt her throat tighten, her vision blur at the edges. Margaret leaned back in her chair and spoke for the first time in minutes. "It's not about standards, Jessica. It's about whether anyone's interested in the first place." The words came out light, almost joking, but they weren't a joke. The table went silent again. A few people looked down at their plates. No one defended Emma. No one said a word. Emma stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor too loud. She mumbled something about needing the restroom and walked out before anyone could see her face. She made it to the hallway before the tears came. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to breathe, but her chest felt tight, like something inside her was breaking. She heard the laughter start up again in the dining room, muffled through the walls. They'd already moved on. She didn't matter enough to pause the conversation. She was just the poor relation, the failure, the cautionary tale they'd tell their own children someday. Work hard, or you'll end up like Emma. She couldn't go back in there. She couldn't sit through dessert and coffee, and more questions disguised as concern. She walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the cold. The air bit at her skin, but it felt clean, honest. She stood on the stone patio and looked at the lights glowing in the windows. From out here, it looked like a perfect Christmas. Warm and bright and full of people who loved each other. It was a lie, but it was a convincing one. She walked down the path toward the front gate, just to put more distance between herself and that dining room. That's when she saw him. A man stood outside the iron gate, hands in the pockets of an old wool sweater, staring at the house. He looked around 30, maybe a little older, with dark hair and a tired face. His clothes were worn but clean. He didn't look like he belonged in this neighborhood. Emma stopped. The man noticed her and straightened, almost like he'd been caught doing something wrong. She wiped her eyes quickly, hoping he couldn't see she'd been crying. "Can I help you?" Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. The man studied her for a second, then looked back at the house, just remembering something. "I used to know this place." His voice was quiet, careful. Emma stepped closer to the gate. "You lived here?" He shook his head. "No. Worked here. Long time ago." He didn't elaborate. Emma didn't push. They stood there in the cold, two strangers with nothing to say to each other, and somehow that felt better than being inside with family. Then she heard it. A burst of laughter from inside the house, loud enough to carry through the walls. Someone was telling a joke, probably at her expense. The sound made something snap inside her. She looked at the man through the gate. He was watching her now, curious. She made a decision that was completely insane, the kind of decision you make when you have nothing left to lose. "Do you want to make $50? The man's eyebrows went up. Doing what, Emma pulled her wallet out of her coat pocket. It was a small thing, worn leather, nearly empty. She opened it and took out the bills inside, 2 20s and a 10. It was the money she'd saved to buy Margaret a Christmas gift, something nice enough that maybe her aunt would stop looking at her with that mix of pity and disappointment. She held it out through the gate. "Come inside with me. Pretend to be my boyfriend for 1 hour. That's it. Then you can leave." The man stared at the money, then at her. He didn't reach for it. "Are you serious?" Emma felt her face burn, but she didn't lower her hand. "I know it sounds crazy, But I need someone to walk in there with me and make them think I'm not completely pathetic. Just for tonight. Please." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated how desperate she sounded, but she was past caring. The man looked at the house again, then back at her. There was something in his eyes she couldn't read. After a long moment, he reached through the gate and took the money. She felt a rush of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. He folded the bills and put them in his pocket. "What's your name, Emma?" she said. He nodded. "I'm Daniel." She unlocked the gate and he stepped through. They stood facing each other on the path. Emma tried to think of how to explain what she needed, how to make this believable. "Okay, so we met at the coffee shop where I work. You're a technician, computer stuff. We've been dating for 3 months. Keep it vague if they ask questions. Just follow my lead." Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once. Got it. His calm was unsettling. Most people would have asked more questions, shown more nerves. He just stood there, like this was something he did every day. Emma started walking back toward the house. Daniel fell into step beside her. She could feel her heart hammering. This was insane. This was going to blow up in her face. But the thought of walking back in there alone, of sitting through the rest of the night with nothing to show for herself, was worse. At least this way she'd have something. Even if it was a lie. Especially if it was a lie. They reached the back door. Emma stopped and turned to him. "Thank you. For this. I know it's weird." Daniel looked at her for a second, and something in his expression softened. "It's okay. I get it." She didn't know what he meant by that, but there wasn't time to ask. She opened the door and stepped back into the warmth and light. Daniel followed her inside. She took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back toward the dining room with a stranger at her side, ready to lie to everyone she knew. Emma walked into the dining room with Daniel beside her. The conversation died instantly. Every head turned. Margaret looked up from her wine glass, eyes narrowing. Jessica stopped mid-sentence, her mouth still open. Richard set down his fork with a soft clank that seemed too loud in the sudden silence. Emma forced herself to keep moving, to not turn around and run. Everyone. This is Daniel. My boyfriend. The words felt strange in her mouth, like a language she didn't speak. Daniel gave a small nod to the room, his expression calm and unreadable. Margaret stood up slowly, and Emma could see the confusion and suspicion warring on her face. "Your boyfriend?" Since when? Her tone was sharp, accusatory. Emma kept her voice steady. 3 months now. I didn't mention it because, well, I wanted to be sure first. Margaret's eyes moved from Emma to Daniel, and back again, scanning for the lie. Daniel stepped forward and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Cahill. Emma's told me a lot about you." Margaret shook his hand briefly, her grip tight. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Has she? That's interesting, since she's never mentioned you at all." Daniel didn't flinch. Sometimes the best things are worth keeping quiet about. The answer was smooth, practiced. Emma felt a flicker of gratitude mixed with unease. "Who was this man?" Margaret gestured to the table. "We'll sit down then. There's still dessert." Emma and Daniel took the 2 empty chairs near the end. Emma could feel everyone staring, calculating. Jessica leaned forward, her engagement ring catching the light. So Daniel. "What do you do?" Daniel picked up his water glass and took a sip before answering. "I work in technology, systems management mostly." It was vague enough to mean almost anything. Brian, the finance cousin, jumped in immediately. "What company?" Daniel smiled slightly. "A consulting firm. We work with several clients, contract basis." Richard cleared his throat. "And how did you two meet?" Emma spoke before Daniel could. "At the coffee shop where I work. He came in one morning and we just started talking." Daniel nodded along his face, giving nothing away. Best coffee I've ever had. Emma makes a perfect cappuccino. A few people smiled politely, but Emma could see the disappointment forming. This wasn't the impressive boyfriend they'd hoped for. He was just another ordinary guy with an ordinary job. She was still exactly who they thought she was. Stephanie, the lawyer, leaned back in her chair and studied Daniel with the kind of look she probably used in courtrooms. "Do you live nearby?" Daniel shook his head. "Downtown? I have an apartment near the financial district." Stephanie's eyebrows went up slightly. "That's an expensive area. Must be doing well for yourself." Daniel's expression didn't change. "I get by." The answer was careful, revealing nothing. Emma realized he was good at this, maybe too good. She wondered briefly what his real story was, but then Margaret spoke again. "So, you're serious about Emma planning for the future?" The question was aimed at Daniel, but it felt like an attack on Emma herself. Daniel looked at Emma, and for a second, something passed between them that felt almost real. "I think she's worth planning for." The words were simple, but they hit different than Emma expected. Margaret made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "Well, that's sweet. But love doesn't pay bills." "Do you have savings property? Any kind of security?" The questions kept coming. Brian wanted to know about his retirement plan. Richard asked about health insurance. Stephanie pressed him on career trajectory and long-term goals. Daniel answered each question with the same calm vagueness, never giving them anything concrete to grab onto. Emma sat beside him, feeling smaller with each exchange. Even with a boyfriend, even with someone sitting next to her, she was still being judged and found wanting. They weren't impressed. They were disappointed. Jessica, who'd been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke up. She directed her question to Emma, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm happy for you, really. But Emma, don't you want someone who can, provide for you? Take care of you, one with ambition." Emma felt her face burn. Daniel shifted in his seat, and she could sense something changing in his posture. Before she could respond, Brian laughed. "Come on, Jess. Be realistic. This is probably the best Emma can do." "No offense, man." He directed the last part at Daniel with a shrug. Margaret set down her wine glass. "I have to agree. Emma, you need to think practically. You can barely support yourself. How are two people with no real prospects supposed to build a life?" The words landed like stones. Emma stared at her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She felt Daniel's hand cover hers on the table, warm and steady. Then he spoke, and his voice had changed. It was still calm, but there was steel underneath now. "I'm curious about something." Daniel looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. "You all seem very concerned about money and status and career success. Has anyone here asked Emma if she's happy? Has anyone asked what she wants out of life? Or is her value as a person only measured by her bank account?" The room went completely still. Margaret's face hardened. "Excuse me." Daniel didn't back down. "You heard me. Since I walked in here, every single question has been about what I own, what I make, what I can provide. No one's asked about character or kindness, or what kind of person Emma is." Richard tried to interrupt. "Now hold on. We're just being realistic." Daniel turned to him. "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're all just looking for reasons to feel superior. Emma works hard. She shows up every day. She's patient with difficult customers, and she never complains. She has integrity. How many people in this room can say the same?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Jessica's face had gone red. Brian looked away. Stephanie studied her wine glass like it held the secrets of the universe. Daniel continued, his voice quieter now, but somehow more powerful. "She came to this dinner hoping for family. What she got was interrogation and judgment. You want to know if I'm good enough for her. Maybe the question should be whether any of you are good enough to be her family." Margaret stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "How dare you come into my home and speak to us this way? You don't know anything about this family or what we've done for Emma." Daniel stood too still, calm. "I know Emma spent 2 hours setting up this party before any of you arrived. I know she bought you a Christmas gift with money she couldn't afford to spend. I know she apologized for existing about 6 times since I walked in here. So, yeah, I think I know enough." Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. Something was breaking open inside her chest, something that felt almost like relief. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever stood up and named what was happening. The room stayed frozen for several seconds. Then Jessica broke the silence with a nervous laugh. "Well, this got intense. Maybe we should all just calm down?" Daniel looked at Emma. "Do you want to stay?" The question was genuine, offering her a choice she hadn't realized she had. Emma shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think I do." She stood up and Daniel moved to stand beside her. They started walking toward the doorway together. That's when they heard the front door open. Footsteps in the hallway. A man's voice calling out a greeting. Margaret's expression shifted from anger to forced brightness. Oh, that must be Robert. He said he'd try to make it. She moved toward the hallway. Emma and Daniel stopped at the edge of the dining room, blocked from leaving by Margaret's sudden movement. A man in an expensive suit walked in, tall and gray-haired, carrying a bottle of wine that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Robert entered the dining room with Margaret beside him, already launching into apologies for being late. He was in his 60s, distinguished in that way that comes from money and power. His eyes swept the room, landing on familiar faces, offering brief smiles. Then his gaze stopped on Daniel. The wine bottle slipped slightly in his grip. His mouth opened. "Daniel Turner, you're here." The name hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt Daniel tense beside her. Margaret looked between Robert and Daniel, confused. "You two know each other?" Robert set the wine down carefully on the table, his movements deliberate. "Know each other. Margaret, do you have any idea who this man is?" The room waited. Robert turned to face everyone else, and Emma could see the disbelief on his face. "This is Daniel Turner, CEO of Turner Global Enterprises, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. He's been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. Emma's world tilted sideways. The silence that followed was different from before. This one was dense with shock and disbelief. Jessica's mouth fell open. Brian actually stood up from his chair. Richard blinked, like he was trying to clear his vision. Stephanie's wine glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Margaret's face went through several expressions at once, none of them readable. Emma couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man she'd paid $50 to pretend to be her boyfriend was a billionaire. The absurdity was so complete, it almost felt like a hallucination. Robert walked toward Daniel with his hand extended, and Emma watched as Daniel shook it reluctantly. "I heard you kept a low profile, but I never expected to find you at a Christmas dinner in the suburbs." Daniel's voice was tight. "I value my privacy, Robert." The older man laughed, oblivious to the tension. "Clearly. I almost didn't recognize you without the security detail." He turned to Margaret, his excitement building. "Do you realize what this means? Your niece is dating one of the most successful men in the country. This is incredible." Emma watched as her aunt's face transformed. The hard edges softened. The judgmental lines around her mouth disappeared. She looked at Emma with something that might have been pride, or might have been avarice. Emma couldn't tell anymore. Margaret moved toward her with arms outstretched. "Emma, honey, why didn't you say something? If I'd known Daniel was someone so accomplished, so important, we would have been thrilled. We are thrilled." Emma stepped back before Margaret could reach her. The movement was instinctive, protective. Around the table, the shift was immediate and nauseating. Jessica practically bounced in her seat. Oh my God, Emma, you have to tell us everything. How did you really meet? How long have you known this is so exciting? Brian clapped his hands together. Turner Global, man, I've followed your stock for years. Brilliant work. Absolutely brilliant. Richard nodded vigorously. This changes everything. Emma, you should have introduced us sooner. We could have talked business-made connections. Emma felt sick. She looked at each of them in turn. 5 minutes ago, they'd been picking her apart, dismissing her, dismissing Daniel. Now they were falling over themselves to be gracious, to be welcoming, to be part of something they thought mattered. The hypocrisy was so thick, she could taste it. Margaret reached out and actually touched Emma's arm, a gesture of affection she hadn't shown in years. I always knew you had good instincts, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. The words should have felt good. Emma had spent years wanting her aunt to say something like that. But hearing them now, knowing they were only spoken because of who Daniel was, because of what he was worth, felt like being stabbed with something soft and warm. The pride wasn't for Emma. It was for the proximity to wealth. She pulled her arm away. Daniel's hand found hers again, and this time, she held on tight. We're leaving. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Margaret's smile faltered. What? No, you just got here. We should celebrate open champagne. Emma shook her head. She looked at her aunt, at her cousins, at all the people who'd spent the evening making her feel worthless. You don't get it, do you? Nothing changed. I'm the same person I was 10 minutes ago. But now you care because he has money. Now I matter because of what he's worth. Margaret's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic, Emma. We always cared about you. We were just concerned. Emma laughed, and it came out bitter. You weren't concerned. You were disgusted. You made that clear. Jessica tried to smooth things over her voice, bright and desperate. Emma, come on, we were just joking around. Family teases each other. That's normal. Emma turned to her. You asked me if I'd given up on life. You told me to lower my standards. That wasn't teasing. That was cruelty. Jessica's face flushed. She looked around for support, but no one met her eyes. Brian cleared his throat. Look, maybe we were a little harsh, but you have to understand we just want what's best for you. We want you to be successful. Daniel's voice cut through. No, you want her to make you look good. There's a difference, Brian bristled. Who the hell are you to judge us? You show up here pretending to be some regular guy lying to everyone. That's pretty manipulative if you ask me. Daniel's expression didn't change. I didn't lie. I just didn't correct your assumptions. You decided I wasn't worth your time based on my clothes and my vague job description. That says more about you than it does about me. Margaret held up her hands. Okay, everyone just stop. This has gotten out of hand. Emma, Daniel, please sit back down. Let's start over. We can have a nice evening. Emma looked at Daniel, and he looked back at her. In his eyes, she saw something she recognized. The exhaustion of being valued for the wrong reasons. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who only wanted you for what you could give them. She understood now why he'd been standing outside the gate, why he'd agreed to her crazy request. He was as tired as she was. She turned back to Margaret. No, we're not starting over. I'm done. Margaret's face hardened. Fine. Leave then. But don't come crying back when this doesn't work out. Men like him don't end up with girls like you. Not for real. The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but not in the way Margaret intended. They hurt because they revealed what her aunt had always thought of her, that she was less than, that she was unworthy, that she needed to be grateful for scraps. Emma walked toward the door with Daniel beside her. Behind them, the dining room erupted in whispers and murmurs. She caught fragments. Can you believe it? What are the chances? She's so lucky. None of them understood. She wasn't lucky. She was drowning. Daniel opened the front door, and they stepped out into the cold. The door closed behind them, muffling the voices inside. Emma made it 3 steps down the walkway before her legs gave out. Daniel caught Emma before she hit the ground. He guided her to sit on the front steps, his hands steady on her shoulders. She couldn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, she sat there, shaking her breath, coming in short gasps that didn't seem to bring any air. Daniel sat beside her and waited. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just sat there in the cold while she fell apart. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was raw. "Why did you do it? Why did you agree to come inside? You could have just taken the money and walked away." Daniel leaned back against the step, looking up at the sky. "Honestly, I was curious, and maybe a little bored." Emma let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something breaking. "You were bored. That's great. My whole life is a joke, and you were bored." Daniel turned to look at her. "That's not what I meant." Emma shook her head. "It doesn't matter what you meant. Do you know what just happened in there? They respect me now. For the first time in years, my aunt looked at me like I was worth something. But it's not because of anything I did. It's because of you. Because of your money. Your success. I'm still exactly who I was before, but now I'm acceptable because I'm standing next to the right person." She stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the energy coursing through her. "I paid you $50 to pretend to care about me. And you know what the worst part is? Even that was a lie. You didn't need the money. You probably thought it was funny. Poor desperate girl willing to pay a stranger to validate her existence." How pathetic is that? Daniel stood too, his expression serious. "I didn't think it was funny." Emma turned on him. "Then what was it? Why didn't you tell me who you were? Because people treat me differently when they know." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "They see the money first, and the person never. I stood outside that gate tonight because 23 years ago my father worked in that house. He was a plumber. He fixed a broken pipe in the basement and accidentally knocked over an expensive vase. The owner, your aunt, probably fired him on the spot and refused to pay him for the work he'd already done. My mother had to work double shifts for a month to make up the difference." Emma stared at him. The story landed like a weight. Daniel continued, his voice steady. "I built my company from nothing. Worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. Slept in my car some nights. When I finally made it, when the money started coming in, I thought things would be different. But people still only saw one thing, just a different thing than before. So I started keeping quiet about it, testing people, seeing who they really were when they thought I was nobody. And I'm nobody." Emma's voice cracked. "That's what you proved tonight. Without you, I'm just the poor niece who can't get her life together. With you, I'm suddenly worthy of respect. But it's not real. None of it is real." She sat back down on the steps, the fight draining out of her. "I don't even know who I am anymore. I thought if I could just get through tonight, if I could just show them I wasn't completely alone, maybe they'd see me differently. But they don't see me at all. They never did." Daniel sat down beside her again. "When I was building my company, I had a partner. Smart guy, good with numbers. We were friends, or I thought we were. When we started making real money, he tried to push me out. Told the board I was unreliable, unprofessional. Said I didn't have what it takes to lead. The only reason I'm still CEO is because I had documentation of every decision, every conversation. I learned then that you can't build your life on what other people think of you. Their opinions shift with the wind." Emma looked at him. "So what do you build it on?" Daniel met her eyes. "What you think of yourself. What you know you're capable of." Emma laughed bitterly. "I don't know what I'm capable of. I'm 28 and I have nothing. No career, no savings, no future. I live in someone else's house and work a job that leads nowhere. What exactly am I supposed to respect about that. You showed up tonight even though you knew it would be hard. Daniel's voice was matter-of-fact. You took care of people who don't take care of you. You risked the last money you had on a crazy plan because you were desperate to feel like you mattered. That takes courage. Emma shook her head. That's not courage. That's stupidity. Daniel smiled slightly. Sometimes they look the same from the outside. They sat in silence for a moment. Emma felt exhausted, hollowed out. She thought about going back inside, apologizing, trying to smooth things over. The thought made her feel sick. She thought about where she'd go after this, what she'd do. The small room at her aunt's house suddenly felt like a cage she'd been living in without realizing it. I can't go back there, she said quietly. Not to that house, not to that life. Daniel nodded. So don't. Emma turned to him. It's not that simple. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't have money for rent or deposits. I don't have references that aren't from that coffee shop. I'm trapped. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke carefully. I have a friend who runs a marketing firm. Small company but growing. They're looking for someone to handle their social media and client outreach. It's entry level, but it's in your field. I could introduce you. Emma felt something twist in her chest. There it is. The rescue. The rich guy swooping in to save the poor girl. I don't want your charity. Daniel's voice stayed level. It's not charity. It's a connection. You'd still have to interview. You'd still have to prove you can do the work. I'm just opening a door. You have to walk through it yourself. Emma wanted to say no, wanted to reject the help on principle, but she was so tired of struggling alone, of pretending she didn't need anything from anyone. Why would you help me? Emma's question came out small. Daniel looked at her. Because I remember what it's like to need a door opened. And because you're more than they think you are. You just need the chance to prove it. Emma felt tears finally start to fall hot against her cold cheeks. What if I can't? What if I fail? Daniel stood and offered her his hand. Then you fail. But at least you'll fail trying something real, not suffocating in that house waiting for people to see you. Emma took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Okay. I'll try. But I need to be clear about something. Whatever this was tonight, it stops here. No more pretending. No more fake boyfriend. I don't want their respect because of who you are. I don't want anyone's respect unless I earn it myself. Daniel nodded. I understand. For what it's worth, I think you already earned it. You just gave it to the wrong people. They walked to the curb where a car was parked. Emma realized it must be his. It was nice but not flashy, the kind of car that didn't draw attention. He pulled out his phone and typed something, then showed her the screen. It was a contact. This is Karen. She owns the marketing firm. I'm sending her your information. She'll reach out next week. Emma took the phone and added her email and number. Her hands were shaking. When she handed it back, she met his eyes. Thank you. I mean it. Even if this doesn't work out, thank you for tonight. Daniel smiled, and it was the first real smile she'd seen from him. It'll work out. You're stronger than you think. He got in the car and drove away. Emma stood on the empty street and watched the taillights disappear. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. Not to go inside, just to get her coat and her bag. She'd figure out where to sleep tonight. Maybe a cheap motel. Maybe the bus station. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was choosing to leave. 1 week later, Emma signed a lease on a studio apartment. It was small, and the walls were thin, and the heater made a rattling sound, but it was hers. She'd gotten the job at the marketing firm. The interview had been hard. Karen asked tough questions and didn't give her any special treatment. But Emma had prepared. She'd stayed up 3 nights studying the company, learning about their clients, putting together a portfolio of ideas. When Karen offered her the position, she'd said it was because Emma showed initiative and creativity. not because of any connection. Emma quit the coffee shop. Her manager seemed surprised she was leaving, like she'd expected Emma to work there forever. Emma felt bad for not giving more notice, but she couldn't stay in that life one more day than necessary. She packed her things from Margaret's house while her aunt was out. She didn't leave a note. There was nothing left to say. The first month in the apartment was hard. Money was tight. The job paid more than the coffee shop, but not much. She ate a lot of rice and pasta. She walked to work instead of taking the bus. But every morning she woke up in her own space, and that feeling was worth every sacrifice. She wasn't waking up in someone else's charity. She was waking up in her own life. Margaret called twice. Emma let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were similar. Disappointment disguised as concern. Implications that Emma was making a mistake, that she should come back, that she was being ungrateful. Emma deleted them without responding. She thought about calling back, about trying to explain, but she knew it wouldn't matter. Some people never see you for who you are. They only see who they need you to be. 6 months passed. Emma got promoted to junior marketing associate. It was a small step, but it felt massive. She could afford to eat out once a week now. She bought new work clothes. She started paying down her student loans, slow but steady. She met people at work who asked her about her ideas, not her relationship status or her bank account. She started to remember what it felt like to be valued for what she could contribute. One Saturday morning, Emma stopped at a coffee shop on her way to the grocery store. Not the one where she used to work. A new place with big windows and mismatched chairs. She ordered a cappuccino and turned around and nearly dropped it. Daniel was sitting at a corner table with a laptop, wearing jeans and a sweater that looked as worn as the one from that night. He saw her at the same moment. Their eyes met. He smiled and gestured to the empty chair across from him. Emma walked over her heart, doing something complicated in her chest. "You look good," Daniel said. Emma sat down. "So do you." They looked at each other for a moment. "I heard you got promoted," he added. Karen mentioned it. Emma raised an eyebrow. "You're keeping tabs on me?" He shrugged. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. Is that weird a little? But I appreciate it." Emma took a sip of her coffee. It was good, but not as good as the ones she used to make. "I've been meaning to reach out, actually. I never properly thanked you, not just for the job connection, but for that night, for standing up for me." Daniel closed his laptop. "You don't owe me thanks for that." Emma shook her head. "Yes, I do. You saw me when no one else did. That matters." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "So what now? Are you happy?" Emma thought about it. The question felt bigger than it should. Am I happy? I don't know. I'm still figuring things out. But I'm not miserable. I'm not drowning. I'm building something that's mine. So maybe that's a kinda happy. Daniel nodded. That sounds right. They sat there for a while, drinking coffee, not saying much. It felt comfortable in a way that surprised Emma. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I have a confession. That night when you offered me $50 to be your fake boyfriend, I almost said no. It seemed like a bad idea. But then I looked at your face, and I saw someone who was desperate not to be alone. And I thought, I know that feeling. So I said yes." Emma smiled. "I'm glad you did, even though it was a disaster." Daniel laughed. It was definitely a disaster. But it was an honest disaster. Emma set down her cup. "So where does that leave us? We're not fake dating anymore. We're not really anything." Daniel met her eyes, and there was something warm there, something real. We could be friends, real ones this time. No pretending, no $50 contracts. Just two people who understand what it's like to be valued for the wrong reasons. Emma felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like peace. "I'd like that." Daniel smiled. "Good. Then let me buy you another coffee." Emma started to protest, but he held up a hand. "As a friend, not as a billionaire trying to save you." just as someone who thinks you deserve a second cup. Emma laughed, really laughed for the first time in months. Okay, but next time I'm buying. Deal. They shook on it, and Emma felt the last piece of that terrible Christmas night finally fall away. She wasn't the girl who needed rescuing anymore. She was just herself, and that was enough.